Today we're out here in downtown Seattle taking a look at the all-new QX30. Now you may also have heard of the Infiniti Q30, but we're not getting the Q30 in the United States. Instead, we're getting the exact same vehicle labeled as the QX30. Are you confused yet? Well, here's how it goes. We have the base QX30 right here. This is what's also known as the Q30 in other world markets. Then we have the QX30 Sport. This is the Q30 in other world markets. And then right over here, we have the QX30 all-wheel drive. This is what you're finding in Europe labeled as the QX30. What you want to compare the Infiniti to is really up to you. You could compare this with a wide variety of vehicles out there. The Lexus CT200H may be a hybrid, but it's also a luxury hatchback. You could probably compare that to this right here. We don't have the Volvo C30 in the United States anymore, but it was really only a 3-door hatchback, not a 5-door like we're seeing right here. This could also be a luxury alternative to something like a Mazda 3 hatchback, something that you could step up into if you're wanting a luxury vehicle that's about the same size as your current compact hatch. The Sport model is a viable alternative to the Volkswagen GTI. We get somewhat similar performance, over 200 horsepower out of the engine, a 7-speed dual clutch transmission instead of a 6-speed dual clutch. Definitely more luxury going on the inside, but this is only a 5-door. The GTI is available in either 3 or 5-door. Then obviously we have the target market for the QX30 all-wheel drive, which is the GLA, the Q3, and the BMW X1. Up front, the QX30, the QX30 Sport, and the QX30 all-wheel drive look very similar, but there are some subtle changes. We get slightly different grills, slightly different lower grille treatments. We also get slightly different fog lamp treatments right around here. But the big difference between the three models is the ride height. The Sport model is the lowest of them all at 6.1 inches off the ground. The regular model is in the midpoint at 6.7 inches of ground clearance. The top-end model has a very crossover-like 7.9 inches of ground clearance. The model that we're taking a look at right here is the QX30 all-wheel drive, which is expected to be the volume model. We also have the optional full LED headlamps. These also steer in the corners. You may have heard that the QX30 is related to the Mercedes-Benz CLA and the Mercedes-Benz GLA. That is definitely true. Basically, what Infiniti did here is they worked with Mercedes to co-develop a vehicle that combines Mercedes-Benz platforms and a Mercedes-Benz engine, and then everything else that you're seeing is Infiniti. So this is a very different look up front than anything that we see from Mercedes. At 174 inches long, this is logically enough just about the exact same size as the Mercedes-Benz GLA. That means that it is a little bit longer than the Audi Q3 and a little bit shorter than the BMW X1. Out back, we get a very distinctive style. We have these large Infiniti tail lamp modules, again, that sloping rear glass that I showed you earlier, and this definite curving theme to this hatch right here with a chrome strip accentuating that particular line across the back. We also have dual exhaust tips, and in our particular model, there's a black treatment around each one. They're very well integrated into the back of the vehicle, as are the parking sensors. Although there will be different engines under this hood for other world markets, in the United States there is just one engine design. It's a 2-liter 4-cylinder turbocharged engine. It produces 208 horsepower and 258 pound-feet of torque. Power is sent either to the front wheels or to all 4 wheels via a 7-speed dual clutch transmission that is shared with the Mercedes-Benz GLA and the Mercedes-Benz CLA. Fuel economy figures have not been released yet, but I do expect them to be fairly similar to what we see in the Mercedes line. The model I'm sitting in right now has the optional sport seats, which I do find to be a little bit less comfortable than the other seats available in the QX30. It's mainly because of the non-adjustable headrests that these seats have. We have a tilt telescopic steering column with a very large range of motion. We have multi-way powered driver's seat. Some very nice touches in this cabin are that the passenger seat has the same range of motion as the driver's seat. This model also has a 4-way adjustable lumbar support, which is something that I really appreciate. We also have 3-position memory for both the driver and the front passenger. Because of some file corruption issues, I'm going to be talking about the QX30's rear seat in an entirely different vehicle, and I do apologize for that. Even though the QX30 is shaped a little bit more like a hatchback and a little bit less like some of the boxy entries in this segment, legroom figures are actually quite good, and headroom was generous as well. I still had about ½ inch of headroom, even sitting in the middle seat. Although the QX30 does not offer a 40-20-40 folding rear seat back, it does offer a pass-through in the center of the rear bench seat on the 60% side. That means that you could put 2 adults in the back and put skis or other long items in the vehicle very easily. Although the overall style of the QX30 is sort of hatchback meets crossover, you'll actually find more cargo room behind the rear seats than you'll find in most of the crossovers in this segment. Just over 19 cubic feet of cargo space back here means that I can fit this 22-inch roller bag. This is the largest size you can carry on a domestic flight in this upright position right here, and to still be able to close the tonneau cover and the cargo hatch. you could actually put a little bit more luggage right on top of that. You could put at least 4 of these across the rear. If you wanted to leave this hard tonneau cover out of the vehicle, you could put them in the upright position, but with this cover in place, you just can't close the hatch. If I take this bag out of the vehicle and we lift the cargo area load floor, you'll notice that there is no spare tire under there. That's where the subwoofer and the can of Fix-A-Flat and the tow hook live. Let's take a quick spin around the interior. Our model has a large panoramic moonroof. This is not quite as large as some vehicles you'll see out there. You'll notice that it doesn't go all the way to the rear passengers' heads. The driver and the front passenger have height adjustable seatbelts, and we have 4-way adjustable headrests. They move forward and backward in this fashion, and then there's a separate button right here for the up-down motion. If you're familiar with both Infiniti products and Mercedes products, then you will definitely notice that this is largely Infiniti inside, but there are definitely some Mercedes parts around. So the seat switches that are right over here on the door, along with the 3-position seat memory for both the driver and the front passenger, these are definitely out of the Mercedes parts bin. However, the rest of this door's design is definitely Infiniti. That also goes for the general design of the front seats, which I found to be a little bit more comfortable than we see in the Mercedes-Benz Gla. The big difference, of course, inside is this dashboard. It is quite different than anything we see in the Mercedes-Benz family. We also don't have the Mercedes Infotainment System. This instead uses the Infiniti Infotainment System, very similar to what we see in the Infiniti Q50. I haven't had enough time with this car to go over this infotainment system in great detail, so there is not a detailed infotainment review on the channel. However, that should come up as soon as I can get my hands on one for a week. The key thing to know about this particular system is that this is a touchscreen, so you can use the controller knob in the center of the dashboard, or you can use the touchscreen, whichever is easier for you. The dashboard is a combination of stitched materials. We have a stitched material section up above the display, stitched right down here as well, and then soft touch injection molded plastics the rest of the dashboard. On the passenger side, we have a moderately sized drop-down glove compartment. I was able to fit a small tablet computer inside. Below the infotainment screen, we have 2 large air vents, a single slot optical disc player, some direct access buttons to various features, radio presets, and the volume power knob for the infotainment system. You'll find the heated seat controls right down here below that power knob, along with the hazard light button, the button to enable and disable the auto start-stop system, and the parking sensor enable-disable button. Below those buttons, we find the controls for the 2-zone climate control system, along with a small storage cubby that also reveals 2 USB inputs. The shifter is a joystick-style shifter. Reverse is towards the front, and then we release, it always returns to neutral. Because our vehicle is not on, all it does is go to neutral. It won't actually go into that gear. If we want to drive, we'd pull back and then release. Park, we just press that button right there. The ESM button toggles between the various drive modes. We have Sport, we have Manual, and then we have the Eco mode. Below the shifter is the control for the infotainment system. This is very similar to what we see in the other Infiniti products. We have a back button, camera direct access button, home, audio, map, voice. This button toggles side to side, rotates around, and clicks down to enter. Next to the infotainment controller, we have 2 large cup holders, and then we have a softly padded center armrest. This opens to reveal a storage cubby right here with a 12-volt power outlet. And then if we pull this cover back, you'll find an SD card slot for the navigation database. On the driver's side, we find an instrument cluster that's essentially unchanged from the Mercedes-Benz models. Again, the vehicle is off, and that's why you're seeing all those warning lights right there on your screen. We have the speedometer on the left-hand side and a large tachometer on the right with a fuel gauge and an engine temperature gauge. Between those, we have a multifunction display, which again is very similar to what we see in the Mercedes-Benz lineup. That's controlled via a set of buttons on the steering wheel. We can see our fuel economy, digital speedometer, that sort of thing right here in this display. In addition to the trip computer, we can also adjust vehicle settings. We can see our service messages, the driver assistance systems. This would be your emergency braking system, your blind spot warning system, etc. These are all very similar in operation to the Mercedes-Benz systems. You can see the status of the audio system, the navigation system, etc. The steering wheel is largely the same as the Mercedes-Benz steering wheel. We have large sport grips right up top. It's a 3-spoke design with a narrow spoke at the bottom. These buttons right over here on the left side of the steering column control that multifunction display. We have up, down, side to side, OK, and a back button. On the right side, we have our voice command button, dedicated phone hang-up and pick-up buttons, voice up, down, and a mute button. You'll notice we also have paddle shifters on the back of the steering wheel. Up on the right, down on the left, and these move with the steering wheel. They're not attached to the column. As we leave this parking lot, a very nice Infiniti touch is immediately noticeable. We have a 360-degree camera, and Infiniti does one of the best 360-degree cameras in the business. It makes it an awful lot easier to park something like this, especially in tight parking situations. The other thing that you notice right away is how much more refined this dual-clutch transmission feels than what we see in the CLA or the GLA, even though it's essentially the same dual-clutch transmission. Infiniti says that they went back and they reprogrammed the software, even though the hardware is is essentially identical to what we see in the Mercedes. The result is a much smoother and more luxury car appropriate driving experience. I've often complained about the dual clutch transmission that you see in the CLA and the GLA, and this does not feel like that. This feels much more like the dual clutch transmissions we see out of Audi or VW. Now, this does not feel like a traditional automatic transmission. It never will because of the internal construction and design of the transmission. However, it is unquestionably smoother than some of those other transmissions we see out there. So why do we have a dual clutch transmission? Well, there are actually two reasons. The first one is acceleration. We ran from 0 to 60 in 6.6 seconds. Now, I haven't had this on my home track, nor to 0 to 60 tested on the same course that every other vehicle gets tested on, but I expect that number to remain just about the same. This is one of the fastest entries in this segment. BMW's X1 used to be the fastest entry, but now it's no longer available with the 3-liter turbocharged engine, and that really has dropped its 0 to 60 score. The Audi Q3 is quite slow in every form because it is one of the heavier entries in this segment. It's also one of the least powerful. This is definitely faster than something like the Lexus CT200H if you want to compare it to something like the Lexus hatchback. The 60 to 0 braking scores are equally impressive. We ran from 60 to 0 in this vehicle, again, not on my home track, in 110 feet. That's sort of, compact sports car territory. Something like a BMW 3 Series or a Cadillac ATS, they would have difficulties stopping as short as this vehicle. And that actually surprised me a little bit because these tires are not as wide as what we see in the Audi Q3. In addition to the very short stopping distance, Infiniti also gives us optional cross-drilled rotors up front, which will also help improve the fade resistance. So if you're really beating your car hard out on your favorite winding mountain road, this will definitely stop shorter time after time after time. The handling in this vehicle is excellent, but it does vary based on the model that you get. We are in the Sport trim, so this has the stiffest of the suspensions available. If you get the QX30 all-wheel drive, the suspension is notably softer and the handling does take a little bit of a toll. However, I think that personally the QX30 all-wheel drive is the best blend of sport handling and a nicely polished ride, because when it comes to the ride, I'm going to have to give this a C+. The ride is definitely firm, and it's a little bit too firm for my taste. It's very similar to what we see in certain versions of the competition. It's difficult to comment on cabin noise because, again, we haven't been driving this on our usual roads. However, I do suspect that this will come in fairly average in the segment. It again depends on the model that you get. Because we're in the Sport model, it seems like we get a little bit more road noise than I experienced in the all-wheel drive version. The other big reason to use a dual clutch transmission in a vehicle like this is fuel economy, and fuel economy has been excellent during our day with this car. I've only been driving this for a day and perhaps about 6 hours or so, but our fuel economy has been ranging from 28 to 30 miles per gallon. I expect that to translate directly to when I get this on my home roads and am able to really give it a test on my normal route. I know I sound like a bit of a parrot here, but the reason I can say that is because, again, this engine and transmission is essentially what we see in the Mercedes-Benz Gla, and it performs very well in this segment when it comes to fuel economy. My overall ranking of the QX30 surprised me a little bit. I expected these scores to mirror the Mercedes-Benz Gla just a little bit more closely. All the vehicles in this segment do very well. They all handle very well, they all brake very well, they all ride fairly nicely for a small compact vehicle like this. They'll have fairly quiet cabins, and they're all relatively fuel efficient. However, this vehicle combines everything with a slightly better level of polish than we see out of the competition. Pricing for 2017 is fairly low. $29,950 is where the QX30 will start. For that price, we do get cloth seats, but the rest of the vehicle is fairly well equipped with standard paddle shifters, standard backup camera, and standard power folding mirrors. If you want leather seats in your QX30, you will have to pay a little bit more than an Audi Q3. $32,600 is the next step up that does get you a few more features and the leather upholstery. If you fully load your base model, you'll end up at $42,100. Again, that's for the QX30 front-wheel drive and the mid-height suspension trim. The next step up is this all-wheel drive model right here. This will set you back $34,400. Again, all-wheel drive is standard, leather upholstery is also standard. This trim level is a little bit closer to what we saw in that $32,600 model of the base trim. There's also a mid-level trim of the QX30 for $39,950 that gives you the Bose sound system, the moonroof that we've been taking a look at in this model as well. The moonroof is fixed into place. It does not open like you see in other vehicles out there. If you add all the options to your all-wheel drive model, you'll end up at $44,500, which is a pretty decent discount over some of the German options in this particular segment. In fact, feature for feature, option for option, the QX30 is going to be notably less expensive than the Q3, the GLA, or the BMW X1. The sport trim slots between the all-wheel drive model and the base model in the lineup. It starts at $38,500 and it has kind of a different character. It's more of a luxury GTI if you want to think of it that way. It is 0.6 of an inch lower than the base model. That means it is significantly lower than this all-wheel drive trim that we're taking a look at right here. We get cross-drilled brake rotors up front, the 10-speaker Bose audio system becomes standard, as is navigation and the 360-degree camera. That's why it's a decent amount more expensive than the base QX30. As with the other trims, there are a wide variety of options available, and if you fully load your sport trim up, you'll end up at $42,200, but there's no all-wheel drive available at this time, so the sport trim will not come with the same system that we're seeing in this all-wheel drive model. Let's talk about the elephant in the room first, the Mercedes-Benz Gla, because the Gla and the QX30 are closely related with one another. In the United States, the QX30 and the Gla use the same engine and the same transmission. The suspension is largely similar in terms of design, and the overall vehicle is just about the same size. However, I personally think that this is a little bit more attractive than the current generation Mercedes-Benz Gla, especially on the inside. This interior is definitely a notch above what we see in the Gla. In terms of overall performance and overall handling, they're very, very similar, however. This is going to be significantly less expensive than the Gla, especially if you get carried away with your options over there on the Mercedes. Cooperative design endeavors don't always turn out right. When we take a look at something like the Mazda MX-5 and the Fiat 124 Spider, the Fiat 124 Spider definitely looks like a Mazda that Fiat has then adjusted to try and turn into a Fiat. That's not really going on in this vehicle. This really does look like the marriage between Infiniti and Mercedes in many ways. This vehicle started out with the excellent engine and performance dynamics that we see in the Mercedes-Benz Gla, and then it adds an interior that for some reason Mercedes-Benz just doesn't want to put in their base crossover in the United States. This interior is much more comfortable. It also actually feels more premium than what we see in the Mercedes. The BMW X1 and the Audi Q3 are more conventionally styled crossovers. They have a bigger box in the back. They're not quite this hatchback meets crossover form that we see in the QX30. The BMW X1 is going to definitely be more expensive than this, feature for feature and option for option. Even though it gets a little bit more power, it's also not going to be any quicker than this 0 to 60. It has an 8-speed automatic transmission these days, but the overall vehicle just does not feel quite as eager, quite as sharp as we're seeing in the QX30. The Audi Q3 handles incredibly well, but it is fairly slow, as I have said in previous reviews. The Audi Q3 is probably still one of my top vehicles in this segment. I think that if I were shopping for them, I might pick the Q3 because its handling is absolutely impeccable. It's also a little bit more traditionally styled, but it's definitely going to be slower than this. You'll also pay a premium for that Audi badge on the front. At the moment, my top pick in this segment is going to be the Infiniti QX30. The reason for that is that this is an excellent blend of practical car-like driving dynamics and crossover practicality in the back. Even though this looks like it might be a little bit smaller in the cargo area, you actually get more room behind those rear seats than we find in something like the Q3 or the BMW X1. As always, be sure and subscribe to this channel. Stay tuned for our full and complete review coming up soon as we can get our hands on one from Infiniti.